It is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer. We are live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter here on this Tuesday morning. Please give us a thumbs up, write us a good review. If you do write us a good review on Apple Podcasts, we will read it out on the podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Jonas, we are about a week into the new league year. We've got questions about this Ravens roster, about this Ravens offseason. 8 of them, in fact. Why 8? I guess because Lamar's number 8. Is there a specific reason we picked 8 other than that?
Nope.
Okay.
that was the number that he put on his Photoshop soccer jersey, in which he envisioned a life for himself as the next Lionel Messi instead of the next Lamar Jackson. So let's go with that.
Do you think he did the photoshopping there?
I think he has an army of people. I think when you make $250 million, you can probably afford to get some help.
I was going to say you can afford an Adobe subscription probably, and maybe some classes. So
or one of the fancy AI things, like the ones that you actually have to pay money for, not the cheap ones that we use for.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Jonas, we've got our questions here. We're going to go back and forth with these 8 questions for the Ravens, and going to start with a signing in the division that we saw last week that we were live on a podcast for when it broke. And that would be Patrick Queen going to the division rival Pittsburgh Steelers on a 3-year deal worth about $41 million. And since he's been introduced, Jonas, he's made some comments about wanting to be the villain. This is a guy that he reminded us back in October, told us that Mike Tomlin was yelling at him during a game saying, "You're not a Raven. You're not a Raven. You're not supposed to be there." And Patrick Queen took it very personally. Then he was introduced as a member of the Steelers the other day and said, they're going to let bygones be bygones. And, that's all in the past. And now he's saying he wants to be the villain. He said, quote, "I want to be the villain. I want to be that guy. So I'm looking to do some stuff to them," as in the Ravens. And then hops on Twitter after a bunch of Ravens fans jump to criticize him and, quote, says, "Honestly, bruh, y'all can STFU. It's not even that deep for us players until game week, and y'all can't understand the fact that it wasn't up to me. I gave y'all everything, and now when it's time for me to do what I need, y'all hurt about everything I say. Go touch some grass and fill the void in your life to ones still showing me love with the switch. This is not to y'all." Jonas, is Patrick Queen...
Was it Shakespeare who said, you either die a hero or live long enough
to see
yourself become
a villain? I think that's Christopher Nolan, but anyway.
This was always going to end poorly for PQ, right? Because either he goes to Pittsburgh and sucks, and Ravens fans let him know about it every week, or he goes to Pittsburgh and is mid and is reminded by Ravens fans about it every week, or he goes to Pittsburgh and becomes a Pro Bowler, All-Pro, continues the ascent that he was on before Roquan Smith got to Baltimore. I think it's important that we say that he was good and starting to turn the corner before Roquan Smith got to the Ravens. But in the event that he went to Pittsburgh and was good, then Ravens fans were going to hate on him rationally or irrationally for leaving the Ravens and abandoning, the team that drafted him to go play for the mercenary force, the evil of all evils, the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I think this is just kind of hastening the inevitable. I think there was always going to be this breakoff point with the Ravens fans and Patrick Queen, who just a month ago, Ravens fans were head over heels for just because he felt like one of their own. He was outspoken. He hit hard. He didn't really brook a whole lot of niceties in his play. So he has become the villain in a lot of ways. I think he's probably said some things that if I were his PR team, I would not advise him to. I think taking the social media strategy of someone like Geno Stone, who's just "Love y'all, I'm out, peace," and then just never commenting on that torture relationship ever again, would probably be the best strategy, and probably is the best strategy for a lot of players. But PQ, as much as I love talking to him, I cannot help but admit that he is seemingly a habitual name searcher on Twitter, and when you do that, you give yourself a lot of reasons to be online, and to be mad online is not a strategy that you or I would advise.
No, it's clear that he has been listening very closely his entire career to what fans have had to say, especially on social media. I do agree with his sentiment of touching some grass. I think a lot of people online who are mad online, this goes to as much to Patrick Queen as it does to the people who are saying bad things about Patrick Queen just because he signed with the Steelers. And also, I thought an important thing in here was him saying, you can't understand that it wasn't up to me. The players don't have full autonomy when it comes to free agency. And how much did the Ravens even make an offer? Probably not, because they already have Trenton Simpson waiting in the wings. So it wasn't like Patrick Queen was dying to get out of Baltimore and was eager to play against them. This is what he ended up with, was a contract from the Pittsburgh Steelers that was better than any other deal. So that's where he signed. And so it's not up to him. However, he didn't have to come out in his first answer in that press conference and say he wants to be the villain. Because
Right.
yes, media members sometimes, people asking questions sometimes try to get players, egg players on to get them to say something like that. That was pretty much unprompted. I mean, he was just asked about switching sides, and I think he was the first to use the term villain. I don't think somebody said, "Do you want to be the villain?" I think he just offered that term.
Right, right. I mean, are you familiar with the comedic stylings of drill on Twitter? Follow
Yes, yeah.
the old,
Adderall, yeah.
the old tweets.
Wint, yeah.
Can't you see? Can't you see Patrick Queen's career arc over the next couple of years, basically becoming the "I'm not owned, I'm not
I'm not
owned,
a
I continue to insist" as I slowly shrink and transform into a corn cob. Like this has the the outlines of a very like only in the 2020s social media arc where
yes.
a guy just digs himself further and further no matter what he does. Like he could be an all pro next year, and if in the two Ravens games that he plays, he like misses on a Patrick Queen or on a Lamar Jackson tackle, or like can't pick up a fumble, and the Ravens win both of those games, or even one of those games, it will have been like a good decision for the Ravens in the eyes of the Ravens fans not to re-sign him because of those
Ex-
just two plays. So
exactly.
it is a very, very like only in 2024 hero slash villain arc that Patrick Queen is heading on, which is great for us because it gives us something to write about. I mean, like
It's awesome
with
content.
all
Yeah.
due respect to like CJ Mosley. CJ Mosley was never giving us this kind of content when he left Baltimore for the Jets.
Yeah. All right, Jonas, you've got a question about another player who has left in free agency for a division rival.
Yeah, not as exciting as Patrick Queen, but I think we were at once unsurprised to see Tyler Huntley leave Baltimore, get a deal somewhere else. What was surprising to us was the outline of that deal, the PFF projections for his contract, and the first time that he wasn't a restricted free agency, wasn't a restricted free agent, was 1 year, $4 million. And instead, Tyler Huntley gets a 1 year veterans minimum deal. So about like $1.2 million, but it counts even less against the cap to basically be QB3/QB3.5 in Cleveland. Deshaun Watson is obviously coming back from that shoulder surgery, but they just signed Jameis Winston to, I think, a 1 year, $4 million deal. They still have Dorian Thompson Robinson, who they were pretty high on. When they drafted him last year, obviously DTR got his first start against the Ravens, and the Ravens were like, maybe you should get another quarterback because we are making him look like absolute shit. But I guess the question is, one, the Ravens probably would have been able to re-sign Tyler Huntley if they wanted him, right? And two, would you have done that, or are you just counting on the Ravens to know what they're doing and moving on from what would have been another affordable year of a QB2 and maybe striking out somewhere new with Josh Johnson or Blake Cunningham, or name your quarterback from the draft?
Yeah, I think it's one of two options. It's the Ravens thought that the veterans minimum was too much to pay for Tyler Huntley, or they think that they can do better in free agency or the draft at QB2. Or third option, the door number three, is that they somehow think that Malik Cunningham is good enough to be their QB2. I would suggest they stay as far away from door number three as possible, because Malik Cunningham has never thrown a pass in an NFL game, and he's going to be 25 years old and is an undrafted free agent, which I know was Tyler Huntley. But I don't think the Ravens in any world can go into next season with their best backup options for Lamar Jackson being Malik Cunningham and Josh Johnson, who is 37, because they need a more stable presence behind Lamar Jackson. Like you said on last week's podcast, Jonas, we're a year away from a lot of hand-wringing about Lamar Jackson being able to stay on the field, and you need a suitable backup for every quarterback in the NFL, but especially for Lamar. Maybe they think they can do better with a mid-round pick. I just don't think that any guy that they're going to get in rounds 3 through 6 is going to necessarily be an upgrade in his rookie year over Tyler Huntley. I would have paid that kind of money for Tyler Huntley, but maybe there's another veteran out there that they think they could have. I thought Josh Dobbs honestly made a lot of sense before he signed yesterday with San Francisco, I believe. Yeah, brilliant guy and so-so quarterback, and might have fit their system as a nice little backup to Lamar. So the options are running out on the free agent market. There aren't a whole lot of proven veterans that are left still out there, unless you want Ryan Tannehill, who is like the polar opposite of Lamar Jackson as a quarterback. So I just am not loving the idea that they're going to go into the draft needing to draft a quarterback and a backup to Lamar between rounds 3 and 6.
You say Tannehill being like the exact opposite of Lamar as a quarterback, and I think at this stage in time, you're right. But do you recall Ryan Tannehill's career arc, Paul?
Took a lot of sacks, got a lot of injuries.
At Texas A&M, he started off as, drum roll please, a wide receiver.
A wide receiver, that's right.
Like the inverse race Benjamin Button of Lamar, where he has become a guy that you don't want to play at wide receiver, whereas Lamar has become more and more of the guy that you want at quarterback. But yeah, I mean, Ryan Tannehill is injury prone and would probably exceed the Ravens' budget. I mean, the thing that's tricky is just like, they have 9 picks now. That's a lot of picks. And if you're Eric DeCosta, that either gives you up, the arsenal to move up in the draft, and maybe you're not comfortable picking at number 30 overall. Maybe you want to go up and get a Troy Fautanu, in the lower 20s, as opposed to hanging back and hoping that Tyler Guyton falls to you at 30 or something like that. But that's going to cost some mid-round capital, and maybe with that mid-round capital, you would have otherwise picked a guy like, I don't know, Jordan Travis, or in the 4th or 5th round. So
I like a lot.
If I were the Ravens, I would be. I would be very, very intentional about trying to find a quarterback, especially now that you probably don't need to take a running back, probably don't need to take a defensive lineman in those middle rounds, because you've secured yourself for the near future with Derrick Henry and Justin Madubuike. But, best player available, I guess, is going to dictate how the Ravens want to proceed with their draft.
Let's talk about wide receivers, because my next question for you, Jonas, in this Ravens offseason is, if you're Eric DeCosta, you're looking back on the moves you made last offseason. Are you regretting the deal you signed with wide receiver OBJ? It was 1 year, $15 million, with 4 void years on that contract, essentially to lower his 2023 cap hit as low as possible. He said he was released by the Ravens the other day, and he said on Instagram goodbye to the city of Baltimore, to his teammates. He said in that post that he made the most of the opportunities he was given. He is carrying a lot of dead money, despite the fact that he's not going to be back in 2024, $2.767 million in dead money this year. And then in 2025, $8.03 million in dead money. How bad does that deal look for a guy that is only going to be in Baltimore 1 year and had fewer than 600 receiving yards for the Ravens?
Paul, you've been covering sports for a while. Have you ever, in the course of your dealings, like talked to a player or coach or executive who said and acknowledged on the record that they regretted something?
No, not once.
Like,
not
regret is intrinsically divorced from the like on the record narrative aspect of sports.
They would never acknowledge it. Yeah.
OBJ could have like gotten into a fender bender with like the mayor, and like Eric DeCosta would have said that like it was fine, like everything's fine. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing short of like a capital offense that there's nothing short of like a capital offense that Odell could have done that would have led Eric DeCosta or anyone who would have signed him in an alternate universe to say like, yeah, this was a mistake.
But would they feel that if you give them true serum?
I don't know. I mean, I think they would convince themselves that it was a worthy deal. And like, we've talked about this. I've written about this. Uh, he did finish second on the team in yards. Wasn't a whole lot of yards, but he did do it. Uh, for a stretch there, he was, one of the more efficient receivers in the NFL in terms of yards per route run. He certainly had some clutch catches. The ESPN receiver tracking metrics has him as a top 30 receiver overall for
Sure.
the 2023 season, like higher than Rashad Bateman. Obviously, his production had something to do with that. And then there's just like, the whole Lamar Jackson angle of it all. I guess if you are playing the counterfactual game, then you could say that you could have signed DeAndre Hopkins, who was the other guy who Lamar said, I would like to play with that guy if you're serious about me coming back to Baltimore, and, say that was the move to make. But OBJ signed with the Ravens in mid-April. D-Hop didn't sign until late July. So I don't know if he was on the kind of timetable that would have allowed for the Ravens to get that deal done with Lamar on the timetable that they did, which was very important for putting together their whole offseason. Remember, like the introductory press conference for the Lamar stuff basically happened on the day that the draft happened. So it was very important that they get their ducks in a row when they did. So I think
it was a 2-year deal for.
It was definitely right.
It was also a 2-year deal.
About 26.
Yeah.
With I think less guaranteed money than OBJ, which is also crucial. But I think it was an excusable signing. Was it an overpay? But yes, but I think everyone that you get in free agency on the open market who's not one of your own, it's going to be an overpay. That's just the nature of the beast. That's why you see these like above average guards getting $20 million a year when if you just draft and develop your own, it's a lot more cost effective way of building your roster.
And you knew that you were going to have to pay a premium because of the name, because OBJ carries cachet and because he helps sell jerseys. However, we saw Eric DeCosta make so many brilliant moves last offseason. The Jadeveon Clowney signing, was a brilliant move. The Kyle Van Noy signing was a great move. These are moves that they got more value than they were paying for. But like you said, Jonas, they waited longer to make those deals. A lot of those guys came much later in free agency than OBJ did. And also it kind of balances out the good with the bad. They knew that they were going to be overpaying for OBJ, but they were hoping that they were going to get more than they were paying for when it came to these periphery guys. And that's what happened. The thing that just frustrates me is we talked all season about OBJ wasn't signed to make catches in September. He was signed to make catches in January. Just wait for the playoffs. 2 playoff games, 4 catches, 34 yards. You can't just expect a light to turn on when it comes to the playoffs.
Right. I think, and his playing time, it wasn't a matter of him getting reps. It was a matter of him getting reps. Like he just wasn't playing as much as his snap count over the final 2 months of the season suggested he would. Like Rashad Bateman jumped him. It's just as simple as that. So just as we wrap this up, like the OBJ move and merch aspect is something that I think we should underline, because when Eric DeCosta went on with Mike Florio, I think it was in the wake of the whole OBJ signing and Lamar signing, I think last offseason, and Mike Florio asked him about it. I don't know if I've ever heard a team executive acknowledge that the celebrity around a player and the ability of a player to like generate hype, even when that player isn't necessarily in his prime anymore, was a consideration, was something that I've never heard before and might never hear again. Like just the acknowledgement that yes, OBJ is a bit of a publicity ploy. We still think he can contribute, but there was a very real consideration that like this guy will bring fans to Baltimore who might never otherwise be Ravens fans. So I guess credit to Eric DeCosta for being honest about that, but it was still wild that like that was something that was acknowledged openly about the calculus in bringing back Odell. Another guy who's probably not coming back.
Look, if Eric DeCosta can acknowledge that, then maybe he can acknowledge he made a mistake. So, there you go.
Let's not push it. Another guy who is probably not long for Baltimore, Mr. Ronnie Stanley. Gianna Han did a nice story looking at some of the financial data from his restructured contract, which basically suggests that this is, in fact, the last year of the Ronnie Stanley experience. His salary for 2024 cut from $11 million to $3 million. His original contract had a $4 million roster bonus for this year if he was still on the team. He's going to get that bonus, but now it is going to be a $1 million bonus. And 2025 is now a void year. So again, just kind of defraying those expenses over the long haul, even though this is probably Ronnie's last rodeo in Baltimore. So I don't know, Paul. I mean, like, it felt like we were headed toward a situation where Ronnie would take a pay cut to make this team building operation more logical, more, and certainly easier for Eric DaCosta. I don't know that a lot of people thought that the way to do that was just to restructure the deal so that you're basically carving off a year and saying that this is it for you, Ronnie. Do you feel like that was the thing that we should have been expecting all along? Is this the right thing to kind of give up on a player who has been really, really good when healthy, but health has been that bugaboo for him year in and year out?
I think it's entirely fair for the Ravens to be looking to move on from him because you just can't rely on him going forward because he's only going to get older and those injury concerns are going to keep piling up. And for them to try to save some money now and turn towards the future and look towards a draft that is, as Eric DaCosta said, very good in terms of offensive line talent and offensive tackle talent, I think it's the right move. And it gives them, obviously, it's not like they cut bait. It gives them still another year of having that veteran presence, especially after they traded their other tackle in Morgan Moses. But it does still create questions. Is the long-term future of this offensive line is totally up in the air. And that leads to our next question, which is what kind of shape is the Ravens offensive line in at this point, and how can they build towards the future? Because Morgan Moses gone, traded to the Jets. Kevin Zeitler just signed yesterday. So he is out the door going to the Detroit Lions. John Simpson also going to the Jets. He's gone. That's 3 starters on your offensive line, and you just gave your another starter a massive pay cut. Great that Tyler Linderbaum's still going to be there. And nice that you have maybe some in-house replacements. You have Ben Cleveland, who might be starting for this team in week 1. You have Andrew Voorhees. Remember, he was the late round pick, and a 7th round pick, and he's coming back from an ACL injury, kind of a redshirt year for him. You still have Saleh, even though he wasn't very good in the preseason. He's an intriguing option, but they're still going to need to add quite a lot between the draft. And frankly, I think they could still add a couple guys in free agency to the little short-term 1-year deals that are incentive laden, some veterans there, because this offensive line still needs some massive help. And they need to do it over the next 4 months before they get ready for the regular season.
Right. And you know, the fallback from Ravens fans, the refrain is like Eric DaCosta has a plan, and he definitely does. You don't trade someone like Morgan Moses if you don't have a plan. But how good is that plan necessarily going to be? Because you can take a 1st round pick on a lineman, and still things could be shaky for half a year, the entire year and a half. You know, the Steelers took Broderick Jones, I think like number 16 overall last year, number 14 overall, you know, highly rated guy out of Georgia, was, you know, someone who was very, very accomplished, you know, first team all SEC the year before. And I don't think he played until like mid-season. And that was a guy, he didn't make his first career start until week 5 against the Ravens. So you can have these very capable, very well thought of prospects, but there's no guarantee that they will live up to what their potential is, certainly in year 1. I mean, Christ, we are just a year removed, or less than a year removed, from like Saleh being the supposed front runner to take over that left guard spot. And then the preseason comes and he's just absolutely terrible. I mean, like, I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic that year 2 is going to go better for him, but he was unplayable in the preseason. So there's always a jump from college to the NFL level. But when you are talking about what the Ravens have to do to have this season be successful, you know, right up at the top of every offseason to-do list is to have a competent offensive line. That was one of the first things that Lamar insisted upon when, you know, he was kind of becoming to have more and more of a voice in the organization. So obviously Linderbaum is good to go. You hope that Ronnie Stanley, with him being as diligent a worker as he is in the offseason, is going to be as healthy as possible for this next year. But 3 spots, man, that's a lot of spots to cover for, and there's no guarantee that any of those guys are going to be, frankly, as good as the guys they're replacing. It's a high bar even for someone like John Simpson, who was a very capable run blocker, especially on some of those ones where he was just mauling people.
And one of the guys that you have listed as a potential free agent that they could pick up, my guy Greg Van Roten is still out there as a guard. My 33, 34-year-old LVR, GVR guy. But you have Mekhi Becton on there as maybe a guy that they could sign. Mekhi Becton, remember, was a former first-round pick by the Jets, number 11 overall. Out of Louisville in 2020. And he's a reminder, yes, the Jets make terrible draft picks, but he's a reminder that you're not necessarily going to get a superstar at offensive tackle in the draft, and especially where the Ravens are picking at number 30 overall. Tackles get pushed up the board. And yes, this is a very deep draft in terms of tackles, but there are going to be some guys in there that are going to be misses. And so they have to get this pick
even
right.
along those lines, Paul, sorry to cut you off. Like, there's a lot of mock drafts connecting the Ravens to Amarius Mims, who is a big boy coming out of Georgia. Do you know who Amarius Mims will kind of remind you of physically?
Other than myself.
Okay, yeah. There's a certain point at which physics just does a number on dudes physically. Like, if you are 6'8", 360, gravity does different things to you than if you're like 6'5", 320. And so you can get a big boy mauler, but sometimes he becomes Jonathan Ogden and sometimes he becomes Mekhi Becton. It's just as simple as that.
What's your question number 6 of our 8 burning questions, Jonas?
It's a question that we know the answer to. Do the Ravens have any cap space left? Yes, they do. They have about $13 million, according to Brian McFarland, who keeps us well apprised at a Russell Street Report. But again, considering all of the accounting that they need to do for draft classes and practice squad signings and rainy day funds, that $13 million doesn't really give you any flexibility until you start to pull some of those levers that the Ravens have at their disposal, like restructuring Lamar's contract. That's about $11 million in savings. Mark Andrews is about $5 million. Marcus Williams is about $7.2 million. But again, as with any of these simple restructures, which are not pay cuts, to be clear, not pay cuts, you are robbing from Peter to pay Paul. And not you, Paul, another Paul.
Please, yeah.
And there has to be consideration considering some of the contracts that are on the Ravens, budget going forward and how relatively backloaded they are, that the more money you push into 2025 and 2026, the harder you'll make it for yourself next year. So I imagine they're going to have to restructure one of these deals, but you do not want to restructure all of it, because then, again, you just find yourself inching closer and closer to that awful brink where you start to resemble the New Orleans Saints. And brother, you do not want to resemble the New Orleans Saints. You want to be as prudent, as effective, and as smart about your money as possible. And they're going to have to, make some moves to sign some of these guys, whether they're bigger names, smaller names, middle tier names. But you have to be mindful about, your outlay for the next few years as well.
The Saints are catching a lot of strays on this podcast, at least have during this offseason, used as a kind of anti-model organization when it comes to using cap space effectively. That question of number 6, do the Ravens have any cap space left, leads into question number 7, which is, if they are to make extra cap space, if they are to restructure some of those contracts to open up some room, who could they use that extra cap space on? Obviously, running back is taken care of with Derrick Henry, but they definitely need signings on the defensive line. They need to improve their depth. If it's not bring back Jadeveon Clowney, who is meeting with the Panthers, the Jaguars, and the Jets, reportedly, he may be as good as gone. Maybe it's bring back Kyle Van Noy on a cheaper contract. Maybe it's trying to get Emmanuel Ogbah, who was in our free agency bracket, the former Dolphins defensive end. They need depth signings at the very least. They just cannot expect to go into next year with the kind of depth that they have on the defensive line, even if they address it in the draft. But what are some other spots you think the Ravens could address here, Jonas?
To be clear, they're fine on the defensive line. They need outside linebackers. They're bringing back their top 5 they're bringing back their top 5 along the defensive line, so they're good there. But the thing to remember with all this is that you have to allow for the possibility of the mystery door, because there will be guys probably more so after the draft relative to the next month or so leading into the draft who will get released, who become expendable because their GMs realize we drafted some guys who we really like, or we have some young guys who, from what we've seen in offseason workouts, seem to be progressing pretty well. And those guys will become available. Morgan Moses, I think before he signed with the Ravens, was a surprise cut that I think the Commanders/Redskins picked up and did a pretty good job at. There will inevitably be those middle tier guys, lower tier guys who become available and become pretty good options for you because they are thrown into a market where a lot of teams have spent their money, a lot of teams have filled out their depth chart, and there's just not much of a need for those guys who might be fringy starters or capable backups or just older guys with a track record of perhaps not being 100% available every week. So, yes, Kyle Van Noy, I think, would be a good option for a re-signing. Yes, Jadeveon Clowney, if he's probably willing to take a bit of a hometown discount, would be a good signing. But there's also, untold dozens of players who might become available over the next 2-3 months who not only could be cost effective for the Ravens, but also fit into that framework of not counting against the Ravens compensatory pick formula. Because right now, you look at the Nick Corte, the Korte from Spot Track or from Over the Cap, who does a great job with all the comp pick projections, has the Ravens, I think, with 3 right now, like a 5th, a 6th, and a 7th, somewhere around there, maybe a 4th, a 5th, and a 6th. And if you sign a guy before July 1st, I think, or thereabouts is the cutoff, then you run the risk of disqualifying yourself from one of those comp picks. So the Ravens are going to be mindful. They're going to take their time. They're going to be patient and hopeful that maybe someone that we're not talking about right now becomes available and becomes a good option for them, especially on the defensive side of the ball.
All right, our 8th and final burning question, Jonas. You can take a look around the division at some of the impactful signings and ask, what is the most impactful signing outside of the Ravens in the AFC North?
Not just the AFC North. Well, let's talk AFC at large.
You want to spread it out to the AFC? Sure.
So, I mean, we're talking Super Bowl or bust here, right? We gotta consider all of the obstacles in the Ravens' way. So I have a pretty easy answer for this about which is the most impactful signing. But just to recap, the Steelers signed Russell Wilson, traded for Justin Fields for, and they got both of them on the cheap. Obviously, they signed PQ to the 3-year deal. The Browns didn't really do a whole lot. They did a good job of re-signing their own, brought back Zadarius Smith on a nice deal, but they signed Jameis Winston to that 1-year, $4 million deal. The Bengals, again, some significant losses, losing Chidobe Awuzie, losing DJ Reader, both guys who had been linchpins for that defense over the past couple of years, but somewhat replacing them, bringing in Sheldon Rankins for, $12 million a year deal. Zach Moss, a nice budget signing for them at running back. Obviously, Geno Stone heading to Cincinnati on a 2-year, I think, $14 million deal. But then around the AFC, Bills, again, kind of strapped for cash. I think their big signing was Curtis Samuel, $8 million a year, which really is not a whole lot for a wide receiver. And then for me, I mean, it's probably the most obvious one. It's the most poignant one for Lamar. And for those early years of Lamar with him in Baltimore, it's the Chiefs signing Hollywood Brown. Relatively cheap deal, 1 year, $7 million, worth up to $11 million. But if you are talking about him potentially being the guy who could come in and be that upgrade on Marquez Valdes-Scantling, the field stretcher, the guy who will probably be able to catch more balls than MVS was able to last year because Hollywood Brown actually has good hands and MVS doesn't. But I think it's a good signing because the Chiefs probably have. I know they have the best Super Bowl odds in the AFC right now. They're right up there with the 49ers in general. And yeah, they're probably going to trade L'Jarius Sneed, but so many of the tentpole players of that organization are still in Kansas City. And now Mahomes gets another weapon to wide receiver core that was pretty bad last year, but still more than capable of freaking winning the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think you drop Hollywood Brown on that team last year, and he's probably the second leading receiver behind Rashee Rice, who was their second round pick. Hollywood Brown has 1,000-yard receiving season so far in his career. Topped 1,000 yards a few years ago, just barely. I think he's going to do it again with Patrick Mahomes. Although I will say, anybody with any modicum of talent, if the Chiefs were to bring him in at wide receiver, everybody would praise him and say that's a brilliant move because of how little talent they had.
The McCole Hardman effect.
Exactly. How little talent that they had at that position last year. And also, everybody is going to be playing with Patrick Mahomes. So he's going to make every single guy look good. I think Hollywood Brown will have a better year this year. That doesn't mean that he's a better player per se. He still has major flaws as a player, but his production at least could take a massive bump because he's playing with maybe the greatest quarterback ever.
I don't want to wish injury on him. There's nothing but classy with us in Baltimore.
Then
but
don't.
The Chiefs, the Chiefs have a beyond all of the NFLPA stuff with them just not being the most player-friendly organization. Andy Reid runs a tough camp.
Yeah.
He puts those guys through hell, and the main Achilles heel for Hollywood Brown has been injuries. So, it would not surprise me if it gets to be like the second week of August and we're hearing reports of a hamstring pull or, a bothersome shoulder injury or something for Hollywood Brown because, obviously Andy Reid has his players' welfare at heart. He has their best interests in mind, but he's going to put those guys through the kind of camp that John Harbaugh used to put the Ravens through. Yeah. And that might not be the best thing for old Hollywood. He's a bit fragile. He's not getting any more secure in his health the older he gets. So it's going to be interesting to see if he can actually survive camp and make it to week one, because if he does make it to week one, that might be the Ravens Chiefs game.
Yeah.
we're talking about a potentially, it's going to be obviously the rematch of the AFC Championship game, but it could also be a potential Super Bowl preview. And we don't know exactly, where the Ravens and Chiefs game will end up on the schedule next year. But I think it's probably a pretty safe bet that it will be a primetime game.
Yeah, it's going to be a road game for the Ravens. We don't have the schedule yet. We will later on in the spring and summer, but that will be one to watch. All right, Jonas, thanks so much for tuning in, everybody who is watching live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, as we are live every week there. Please give us a thumbs up, a rate, a review, a subscribe, all that good stuff. Subscribe to the BaltimoreBanner.com. $1 for 6 months to read all of Jonas's great work at Jonas_Shaffer. You can read Kyle Goon's work. You can read Gianna Hahn's work. We have more off-season coverage before we get into draft talk, probably at the beginning of April. But we'll have another episode for you next week if nothing major breaks over the next 7 days. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. Thanks so much for tuning in. For Jonas Shaffer,